Hi everybody, in today's video we're going to build a new ability for our player, a dash ability complete with the nice effect and some invulnerability so we can pass through enemies. Hi, my name is Michael. Welcome to my 2D action and adventure RPG tutorial series. Follow along and learn how to create your own AARPG in Godot 4 using GD script. Alright, so to make this player dash ability here, we're not going to bring in any new animations or assets, although I will show you how you can incorporate some of your own if you have those. Okay, but we'll just reuse the existing frames, keyframes we have on our sprite sheet, and reuse existing audio files as well. I'm going to go ahead, though, and open up my player scene. So let's see, where is he at? That's the script player right here. So what we're going to have to do, obviously, right, is create a new state that we'll call our dash state, and we will set up some animations, okay? Even though they're reusing keyframes from our existing sprite sheet, we'll set them up. And then if you have your own sprite sheet and you have animation that you want to use for a dash or a roll, then you can go ahead and replace what we do here with your own keyframes. And you'll have to excuse me, I'm battling a cold that's so long lasting that I didn't want to wait too much longer to make a new video, so I hope I can get through this one okay. But let's go ahead in our player here. Let's begin with simply creating the animations that we need. And so I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. And I don't know if it matters too much which animation we base it off of. If you have an animation that you want to use, you can do that. But, oh, I didn't want that one. Maybe just walk down would be a good one. Okay, we don't need any audio, but I'm going to duplicate this one. So just come over here to animation and duplicate. I'm going to call mine dash. And of course, we have down, up, and side directionality in our animation, so I'll do that. I'm going to go ahead and clear this footstep audio track, and I'm going to delete one of these keyframes, and I'm going to turn off this ping pong looping that I had on that one there. Now I'm only going to use one frame, and I'm going to just use keyframe 12. This is just him walking down with his hand forward. Okay, so this is kind of the cheapest, simplest way to implement this dash. If you had your own animation, again, you could use that. And in fact, as we play around with this, maybe we'll implement it and test it with some different animations that we already have built, like the attack animation, just so you can see how it'll work. But I'm just going to real quick create the side and up animations as well by duplicating this and changing the keyframe. And the keyframe we want for the up is going to be frame 16. And we'll duplicate this one more time and make our side dash. And this is just a nice way to make it so I can get the video done a little bit more quickly and get it out to you guys. Okay, side, keyframe 17. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Not doing anything fancy with this. All right. Okay, that's good. Let's go ahead and create the state that we need for this. Now our state is going to be responsible for the normal state, behavior that we're going to have for our player. But in addition, we're going to build in a fun effect, and that's going to be kind of the icing on the cake for this episode, right? Because creating a state for our player is something we've done numerous times before. Okay, so we'll make a quick state and then we'll get into that cool dash effect. But to begin then, the state machine in here, I'm just going to go ahead and add a new node. And if you recall, our state machine scripts just extend eventually from the node. So you don't need to do anything too special with it. I am going to give it a name of dash. And let's come down here to our player folder in the scripts. You probably have it organized like I do. You've got a states folder. So just come in here and make a new script. And we'll call it, how are we naming them? State _ dash. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this script onto my state right now, and then we'll open that up. And I'm going to go ahead and open up as well just this state script, because this is the base that it needs to extend. I'm going to go ahead and copy this. Copy everything in here and come over to my my new dash state script and paste it. And before I save it, I'm going to change the name to state _ dash, just like that. And this needs to extend state, not node. Okay. But this way, and we got to clear these. A couple things we can remove. This way, we've got our base functions in here, and that was pretty easy, right? Now, what does our state need to do for the dash? It's going to be pretty simple, because what I'd like to do, at least for the version I'm going to build, is depending on the direction, or I should say, whatever direction the player is pressing when they press the dash key, we just want to keep that direction and move that direction in a quicker speed for just a short duration. And then once it's over, we'll return it back to the idle state, because the idle state can go to just about any other required state. A couple other things that the dash state will do is it's going to be invulnerable. So while you're dashing, you could dash through enemies, use it to dodge attacks and things like that. Okay, so we'll build that in, and that'll be pretty straightforward as well. Okay, so let's come in here and let's add the variables and the things that we need here. We want to be able to export a few variables that we can control. Okay, so we'll start with maybe a move speed for the dash. This will be of type float, I guess. And by default, I'm going to set it to 200. I don't know if that's too high, but or too low. We'll play around with it. I'm going to go ahead and export another variable here. And this is going to be a delay for the effect. And you'll see how this comes into play later. So yeah, effect delay. And the effect I'm referring to is the little ghosting effect that we're going to add. And by default, I'll set it to something small like 0.1. And we also want to be able to associate an audio file with this. So I'll export a variable for that. And we'll just call it the dash audio. And this should be of type audio stream. And we don't need to set that to anything. I do want to grab my idle state. So I'm going to drag this, hold control and drop it in. Okay, so we've got a reference to our idle state. And it doesn't need to be state underscore idle. I just need it to be of type state, just like that. Now, a couple things that we're going to add. We're going to add a direction, because remember I said the direction that the player is pressing when the state begins is the direction they'll continue to move. Okay, so I guess I need to start that with var, right? Var direction, and that's a vector2. And we can instantiate that as a vector2.0. I'm saying instantiate, that's not the right word. I can't think what the right word is right now, but the next state variable is something I want to add here. This is just going to make some of our code a little bit cleaner, less if checks and if statements to determine when we need to leave. And then I also want a little timer. I'll just call it effect timer. And this is just going to help us keep track of when we need to spawn another little sprite for our dash effect. And this will be a float that we'll set equal to 0 by default. Okay. So we've got this basic script set up. I'm going to go ahead and decrease the size of this panel down here. We don't really need a ready function. You could keep that or remove it. It doesn't make too much of a difference. But we do need to do some things in the enter function. So we don't need an init either. I'm going to go ahead and delete that one. So in the enter function, we're going to play our dash animation. So we'll just say player.update animation. And for those of you who might be new to this series and haven't followed along, this update animation method on our player will append the correct direction, if it's side, up, or down, to that animation. So the way I want to control the duration of this dash actually is by using the animation. And so if I look at the player, go back to the animation player here, and I'm on my dash, I have this animation at 0.3 seconds, which I think is actually pretty good. Now, alternate ways that you could track the time is you could use a timer. You could just use a timer variable that you subtract, much like we'll do for the effect within this. But letting the animation finish is a nice, simple way. If you just come in and change the duration of the animation, it changes the dash. I guess the downside of this is that because we have 3 different dash animations, you got to make sure you change them all appropriately or accordingly. But I think it's an alright way to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to that. So I'm going to go to player and get the animation player, and I'm going to connect to the animation finished is the signal we want right here, .connect. And what we'll do is we'll just create a little function on animation finished. Okay, and because that function doesn't yet exist, we need to create it. I'm going to go to the bottom of the script here, just paste that in there. And the animation finished signal will pass in the animation name like that. It's a string. Okay. So we want to account for that argument there. And we'll just go ahead and use pass to end that function right now. Okay, so we'll connect to that. And essentially what we'll do is when that finishes, we'll know that our state's done and we can go on to the idle state after that. We also want to set our direction like we mentioned at the beginning, right? I said this a couple times now, but the direction, we'll just set this equal to whatever the player direction is. And if you recall, our player direction is being set constantly based on the input. In our process function, we're going to be setting the velocity based off of the direction and the move speed. We could reference the player direction there. If you did that, the player would be able to control their movement as they dash, okay? But so we don't really want that to happen in this case, so we'll set it now to begin with, and then we'll just reference this direction in our script. And then we want to put a little check in here because there is actually, we'll do that later. We'll do that as we test. But we want to make sure that we have a direction. Like if you're standing still, what do we want it to do? Maybe we'll deal with that in just a little bit. And so I think this is good to get started for the enter. But it's not going to do anything really yet. So let's go ahead and let's flesh out the process part of this function. And then also we can make sure that we can exit the state and we'll hook it up so we can begin testing. Okay. So in the process, this is going to be pretty straightforward. We're just going to set our player's velocity, like we just discussed, equal to the direction times the move speed. And then what we're going to do here is instead of returning null, we're going to return the next state. And if you recall, I did initialize this next state as null, so it's going to return null. Returning null in our state machine means don't change state. If there is a state present that we return, then we're going to change to that state, okay? And so what we'll do is we'll just come down to our onAnimationFinished function, and in here we can set our next state equal to idle because we have a reference to that state, okay? So that's what's going to happen. As soon as the animation finishes, we'll set the next state, and then our process function will just return the idle state, okay? That means that we need to reset the next state to null, and we could do that either on the enter or the exit function. I think it's a little bit safer to do it here on the exit, so that's where I want to do it. We'll just say next state equals null, so once this state ends, it'll reset that value for us, and that'll be good there. Okay, so I think we're just about ready to test this. I guess there's one other thing we want to do, and that's this line here in our enter. We're connecting to this signal every time. Every time we enter the state, if it tries to connect to the signal a second and a third and a fourth time that we dash, we're going to get an error. So one way to do that would be to check if we're already connected in the enter function, or alternatively, we could, I guess right here in the exit, instead of connecting, we could disconnect, just like that. Okay, so that'll disconnect from that signal, right? And that way, the next time we run this, it'll connect, a fresh connection will be created. And we also won't be sitting listening for this because it's really not beneficial to us to be listening to that signal when we're not in the dash state, right? Otherwise, you could leave it connected if it's something that you want, to be able to be fired when you're not in the state. That would be useful, but generally that's not what we want to do. Okay, so I think right now what we want to do is then hook this up so that we can actually test it. Okay, and I need to go into my project settings and I want to add an input map for a dash ability. Right now we have an ability key bound, and I'm using that for the boomerang, and we'll use it for other things, but I think the dash should be separate from those. And I was thinking like the right bumper or one of the bumpers on the controller would be a good use for that. We do have this already mapped as right bumper. We use that in the UI, but I'd like to create a new action name that also listens to that, and I want to call it dash. Oops, I typed that in the filter. I want to type that in the add new action name. So dash, we'll add that. Okay, so I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go ahead and add maybe left shift as the key on my keyboard for now for that. And then I'll also add my right shoulder for my joypad or my PlayStation controller there. Okay, so we've got that bound. And if we look, let's go ahead and just open our walk state. This is the state where I think would be the first place to test our dash, right? So let's go down. We have a handle input in here, and you can see we're checking if the player presses attack or interact. I'm going to change this to an elif actually. And then we'll add one more elif like elephant, event, if the event dot is action pressed. And this time we want to listen for this dash button press. Then what we can do is we can return the dash state, which we don't have a reference to yet. So we maybe should have done that first, but let's just come up here, get our dash state, and just remove that. I mean, it's okay to keep the underscore dash, I guess, but there we go. So now we can dash by pressing this key while we're walking. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go to my Scene 02 and just run this and see if it works. Yeah, there we go. Kind of a goofy dash, right? He's kind of sliding. But you can see, like, if I'm going diagonal, then he dashes diagonally, but I can't change the direction while he's dashing. Okay. So that's actually working all right. I just want to point out that we can test this and adjust it a little bit. I'm going to come to my dash state. I think the move speed could stand to be a little bit quicker. So I'm going to increase that to 250. And maybe we'll run this one more time. Okay, that feels a little bit better to me. I'm making my own sound effects, which means I must want them. Okay, there we go. So far, so good. Let's do the same thing where we've hooked up our dash state. Let's also do that on the idle state, because I think if the player is idle, we should also be able to dash. Okay, so if you're at a standstill. So I'm going to just copy this here. And let's see, let's go over to the player and find my idle state and open that script. So here under handle input, I'm just going to paste that little bit of code in there. I'm going to change this to an elif as well. You know, if you don't know the difference between if and elif, an elif must follow an if statement, and it's saying if this, then do this, else if this. If you remove the elif, then they just become totally separate. Okay, but if not, it becomes a chain. So you only hit the elif if this doesn't happen, which is how that code worked anyways, but I think it's a little bit maybe better in this case to do that. Okay, sorry for the explanation there. Let's go ahead and drag this dash in. We've got a reference to that node, and we're good to go. The problem is, and we'll see this right now, if we run the game with the dash on idle, we don't have a direction pressed, so that's how we're getting the direction for that state. And so what's happening is it's dashing, but it has no velocity, right? So if we look at our state dash, I think what we need to do here is in our enter, we set our direction to the player direction. Our direction, of course, again, is vector 0 when we're not moving. So we need to account for that. So we do have another direction on our player that we always keep track of, and that's the cardinal direction. It's like up, down, left, or right. So let's do this. We'll say if direction is equal to vector 2.0, then what we'll do is we'll set it to the cardinal direction. Okay, so we'll say direction equals player dot cardinal direction, just like that. Now, with that little change, if I run this scene again, we should be able to dash from an idle state. Yeah, there we go. And it's dashing forward. If you wanted it to dash backward when you're idle, that might be something you want. Then maybe you could adjust that. I'd considered that. You would just have to almost do kind of negative, but you'd have to detect which one had a value. Maybe multiplying it by -1 would be enough. Let's go ahead and try that. So now I'm dashing. Yeah, there we go. So if you wanted it to go backwards, right, when you're meaning like, oh, I'm about to get hit, I just want to back up, there's an option for you. All right. Let's go ahead and add some audio to this real quick. That's pretty easy to do. Right now, we don't have a dash audio set. So let's assume that we need to account for that possibility. We'll play the audio here in our enter function. So we'll just say if dash audio, meaning if we have something assigned, then we'll go ahead and play it. So we'll say player dot audio stream. Yeah, we do have an audio. We should have an audio dot stream equals, and then we'll call it, set it to the dash audio. And then we can just play that like so. And let's go ahead to our player here. And we need to set something. I'm going to do a quick load. And I don't know the best sound. We've got some different sounds here that the player can make. This is probably not the best sound, but there we go. Now we've got a sound. I think really you'd want your own special unique sound for the dash. Here we're reusing this little sound that we use for the player to pick up an item. So it'll work. It'll work at least for testing purposes, right? Okay, that makes it feel a little bit better. The next thing I want to look at though, let's go ahead and test this. Right now our dash does not make the player invulnerable. So if I try to dash through an enemy, that did not work, right? I took some damage there. So let's go ahead. This is actually really simple because we've already set up in our game the ability to make our player invulnerable. I'm going to go ahead and just on the first line, I'm going to say player dot invulnerable equals true. And then of course, if we do that, we need to remove that invulnerability at the end of this state. So we'll just set it back to false. And let's test one more time. So now I should be able to dash through a goblin and not take the pointy end of the spear. Yeah, there we go. And I can still take damage afterwards. Okay. So far, I mean, actually, we've built at least as far as functionality, a complete version of a dash, right? But what I want to do is maybe spice it up. So we'll do the last bit of this tutorial. We'll be adding a cool effect to this that is probably useful and beneficial for other features that you might want to build in a game. And then we'll wrap it up. All right, so let's work on this effect. And what I want is like a trailing effect. If you've played something like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, that's one I'm thinking of, where, you know, Alucard, when he does his dodge, there's like a trail effect of the Alucard sprite. So we're going to mimic that, and we're going to do it just here within this state. If we wanted to, you know, if you wanted to, you could take this and you could create a node out of it or something that's more modular and reusable. And I think that would be a really cool thing to practice. But in the interest of time, I don't think it hurts to just build it into this state script, right? So one thing I want to do is we're going to be using our effect timer for this. I want to make sure whenever we enter the state that we reset that effect timer. So I'm just going to say, not delay. Effect timer equals 0. Reset it to 0 every time we start. And then what we're going to do is we're just going to add a few lines of code to our process here. We'll start by reducing the effect timer, counting down, right? And that's what we'll use this delta value for, which is the time since the last frame. So we'll just say effect timer minus equals, and then we can use delta. And then we'll do a simple check. So if our effect timer, not EDDEFF, if effect timer is less than 0, that means it's time to do the effect again, because I don't want to constantly have a thing. What we're going to do is with this timer is every 0.1 seconds is how it's set right now. We're going to spawn a sprite that is a copy of the player. So we'll just, once this happens, we'll reset the effect timer to the effect delay. And then we'll make a little function for this. We'll call it spawn effect. And we'll call this, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and copy that, come down to the bottom of my script, and make our spawn effect function like so. So what we want to do here is we want to get our player sprite at any given time, right? And in this case, every time the timer runs out. And we want to get a copy of it, what it looks like which frame it's on and everything. And we'll create a copy of that. And then we're going to plop it and just stick it in the game world so that it's behind the player, which means we'll be leaving an effect behind the player. And then we'll also just use Godot's built-in tween functionality to kind of animate that little sprite. So it'll stay fixed on its frame and in its location, and then we'll have it fade out and maybe modulate a little bit, right? So that it has a kind of a color effect to go with it. And this will be a good start for anybody who wants to figure out how to do this trail effect. I think this is a pretty straightforward way to do it that doesn't require a whole lot. It is going to be a little bit of code, but it's not terrible. So let's start by just defining a new node. And I want this to just be a node 2D. We could just take a copy of the sprite and plop it in, kind of like I mentioned. The reason why I'm going to use a separate node 2D is because if we look at our player, we do have some positioning. Like our player sprite is not centered within this node. And if we're not careful and we just copy the sprite and place it at the global position, I think we're going to have offset issues where it doesn't quite match up with maybe the head of the copy of the sprite will be down below. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm making a node that I can place, and then we'll place the sprite within the node. So we'll just set this, we'll just make a new node 2D, just like this, node 2D.new. Now that we've created this node that we're going to plop our sprite into, let's go ahead and we're going to add this new node to the scene. And so I'm going to grab, I'm going to say player.getParent. This way, no matter where the player is, we can make sure that this node is part of that same scene tree, right? In the same location. So we'll get the parent and then we'll say add child, and we'll just add this effect node we just created. Okay, so now it's in the game world. We also want to position this. So I'm going to say effect dot, we'll just use the global position, I guess, global position. And we'll set it equal to the player, player.global position, I guess. And I think that's good for now, but that's not going to show anything yet because we need to put the sprite in there. Okay, so that's the first step, is creating this little container. And now let's go ahead and make our copy of the sprite. So we'll just say var, and we'll call it sprite copy. So it's self-explanatory, and this will be a sprite 2D node. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our player again, and we're going to access, we have a reference to our player sprite within the player. Okay. I mean, this is all dependent upon some of the stuff we built in here, but you know, our player has, well, that's what we're referencing. Let's go back and finish the script. What we can do is there's a really nice functionality that's built into nodes in Godot, and it's a function called duplicate, and it's just going to create a copy of that node and all of its children, which is useful because as we look at our player, the way he's set up, this sprite, he's got sub-sprites for the weapon and things like that, right? He's got a shadow. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get all of that. We're going to create a copy of it. And then we can just go ahead and drop this right into our effect. So we'll say add effect.add child, just like this. And let's go ahead and just drop in our sprite copy. Okay. Now let's test this and let's see what happens. I'm going to run my scene. Nice. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You know, if you wanted more or fewer of those, we could come back to our player scene. I think this will update in real time. Let's go ahead and, yeah, let's give it a try. Let's set this to 0.05. That should give us, you know, twice as many. I don't know if this is going to work actually. Yeah, there it goes. A whole bunch of them. Okay, so you can tweak that that effect delay to your liking. And it's just going to keep spawning these during that. Now we have an issue here, right? The sprites are just going to stay there indefinitely, okay? And we don't really want that. So we can clear that out. But now we've demonstrated that it works. And before we clear those out, I do want to just show, like if we were to change this, let's say during our dash, we want it to play the attack animation. And in fact, this is a really cheap way to get like a dash attack. I don't know. Although we aren't spawning or enabling the attack hitbox maybe, but regardless, let's just go ahead and look at this. If I save that and run this scene. Oops, wrong button. Okay, so you can see that, right? This is using those frames as they're played, which is kind of cool. Like we're getting the sword, we're getting the attack, we're getting the swipe animation. Not only that, but we're actually getting the sword, which is a separate sprite that is a child of the sprite we duplicated. So with that one simple duplicate command, we really got a lot of mileage out of our code. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just set this back to being my dash animation, even though it's a little bit more boring. Actually, no, let's keep it on attack just for now because it is kind of fun. But you can see how this is working, right? So if you've got your own animation, now all we're lacking is a little bit of visual flair onto this and then destroying or removing, cue freeing, I guess, the sprites or the effect once they've faded out or after a time, right? So let's just come down to our spawn effect. And since each of these effects is kind of a self-contained little node in a sense, we're going to go ahead and write the code within this function to go ahead and animate and then eventually cue free them. Okay. So we'll create a tween. Yeah, we'll just start, I guess, directly with that. We'll just say variable tween. I can't hit the N key. I want to go ahead and strongly type it. There's a simple function called create tween. We'll just call that. Oh my gosh. Tween. I don't know how many times I'm going to type tween today. Okay, so we've got a tween. So now we just need to configure it. And one thing I want to do is I'm going to set some easing on here. So I'm going to say tween.set ease. And this is kind of, instead of just having like a linear transition, it's going to be like more sped up or slowed down towards the end based on the easing we set, right? And so I'm going to use the tween ease out. Tween.ease out, just like that. So that'll kind of make it animate more quickly at the beginning of the animation and then slowly fade out. Is how that should work, I believe. And then I want to just come down here and we're going to modulate the tween. So we'll just say tween.tween underscore property. And we want to do it on the effect. If you notice that, let's look at that tooltip real quick with this tween. We haven't done this for a little while maybe, but the tween property give me that tooltip back. It expects an object, a property, and a final value, and then I guess I can't scroll over, a duration, okay? So those are the things we need to provide. And what we'll tween is we'll tween the effect node, not the sprite node, okay, just to make it a little bit easier. So we'll just pass that effect as the first argument. And then the property we go by name, and it's going to be the modulate is what we want to tween. The final value, we'll go ahead and we need to set it to a color, right? You could make this an export variable if you wanted to, or you'll hard code it like I am right now, but I'm just going to set it to white with 0 alpha as the final value. And then I guess we need the duration, right? So we could pick something, we could put something in. I'm just going to put in something like 0.2. Now something that's cool with tweened is we can call a callback. So once the tween is complete or finished, then it'll call or do whatever we ask it to. So let's say tween.chain, and then we want to put in a tween callback. And we'll just say effect.queueFree here. Okay, so that's pretty simple, right? We want to remove the parentheses on this because we don't use those with callbacks. So if we run this now, then we should get a little bit nicer of an effect, and then those sprites should remove themselves. And in fact, just to make it obvious, let's not tween this fully transparent. Let's go to halfway so you can see it'll pop away, it'll disappear when it gets removed. Okay, so you see how those are getting removed? They're kind of fading a little bit and then they're getting removed. I'm going to go ahead and close this. Let's set this back to 0, 0. Run it again so that they fade all the way to transparent. Well, there we go. We've got a nice little effect happening. Okay. And we can just leave this running. I think one other thing I want to do is I want to start that color effect, that modulate, to be something different. Okay, so let's just come up here. After we set the position of our effect, let's go ahead and modulate it. So we'll say effect.modulate. Oh boy, I'm really having a hard time today. We'll just set it to a kind of a purpley kind of color maybe. And so I'm going to say like 1.5 on the red, which is higher than 1, but that's okay. It'll be kind of bright looking. 0.2, I already kind of tested some colors before, so I'm not just pulling these colors out of nowhere. And then I actually want to have it start slightly transparent. Okay, so it's not fully opaque. So there we go. We're going to go ahead and modulate that when we begin. Now, if I save this and go back to the game here, there we go. Now it's kind of purple. Okay. And that's kind of the complete effect. There's one last thing I want to do, and that's that you see the effect is kind of covering up the player right here. It's just a little bit in front of him. Let's go back to our script where we set the global position. Let's just give it a teeny nudge on the y-axis so that it will appear behind. So where we set this global position, we'll subtract a vector 2 of 0 and 0.1. So it's not even, it's going to be 1/10 of a pixel, right? If I save that, there we go. Now the effect is behind the player, but it's such a small nudge, it's not going to move it enough to register a pixel move in our game. So there we have it. We've created this simple dash effect with really the fun thing about this was that ghost or that trailing effect that we added to the player. If you guys have learned something new, then please give this video a thumbs up, give it a like, helps my channel grow. Subscribe if you're new and you want to see what else I'm working on. And go ahead and drop a comment, you know. This is a pretty long running series, and as some of you have noticed, I've branched out and I've now got my little platformer series that's just begun, and that's going to be a shorter run of a series for now, but something fun that we're doing. And I'm going to keep adding little features to the player and enemies to this game to help those of you out that are trying to develop and build your own games. So yeah, keep following along if you just want to see what's happening and you want to be part of the community. And I guess as always, we'll see you next time.